Yo guys, welcome back to part 4 in this tutorial series. In this clip, we're going to be talking about CodePipeline. So CodePipeline is another one of these code services, so CodeBuild, CodeDeploy, CodePipeline. There's more as well. But the idea of these code services are to be as developer friendly as possible and for you to sort of be able to accelerate the process of getting software out of heads of developers and into production, right? So that's the whole idea here. So CodePipeline is all about visualizing the steps that are required, like the model and the visualization and the steps that are required to actually release your software. So it helps you get a bird's eye view on everything that happens in that process. So everything from the source control part of it, so GitHub or whatever it is, through to your build and test phase and then to your release phase as well. And it can be as complex as you want. And one of the cool things that I really like about CodePipeline is that it's not just for CodeDeploy and CodeBuild. No, you can have Lambda functions in there, you can have SNS alerts going to certain places in there. It's really just a way to chain API calls together, right? So like we always know, like with everything that happens in AWS, like when you're clicking around the console, you're just sort of triggering API calls, right, to perform certain actions, So with what CodePipeline's doing behind the scenes, right, just going through certain phases and making those associated API calls for you, so you don't have to worry. It's really a nice way of ordering things and having it structured in a visual representation as well. So that's what we're going to be working on in this specific clip. So just jumping straight into the CodePipeline getting started page here. So again, it's about automate, track, and learn. So we don't have anything set up yet, so let's just go straight into get started. Now it's going to go through the wizard here, and of course you don't have to use any of this wizard, you can just skip straight into creating your own one, but I'm going to go through the wizard here and just sort of take you guys through what it's like. So remember, we already have CodeBuild and CodeDeploy all set up for our project, so it should be very sort of intuitive and hook together really nicely with the things that we already have set up. So our CodePipeline, let's call this Flaskerino. Next step. It's a really easy step, that one. The source provider, we can actually choose where our code is. So specify where your code is stored, right? So it can be in S3, it can be in code commit or in GitHub. So I'm gonna go to GitHub, I'm gonna hit connect to GitHub here, and that's going to just connect me straight through because I'm already logged in. I can choose the repository, so we're going to choose Flaskerino, and I can choose a branch here as well. So this doesn't have to be just for the master branch. You can have dev branches that get different pipelines run on them, or you can have master branch or whatever you really want. I like the idea of having a multiple branch strategy, but maybe that's a topic for another video another time. So we'll just choose master here. We're going to say that run the pipeline whenever a change in source content are detected. So whenever there is something detected in upstream source changes, so in master in this case, we're going to have our pipeline execute. So that's pretty cool. So next step. So what do we want to do for our build provider? So we can choose things here. We can say we don't want to have any build process happening at all, whatever. We can add in Jenkins. So if you have Jenkins already or you use Jenkins a lot, you can sort of really easily integrate that here. Again, Solano CI, I'm going to use CodeBuild, right? Because we set up CodeBuild already in a previous clip. So all I have to do here is just select an existing project, and there it is, Flaskerino. It's already set up, ready to roll. All I need to do here now is hit next step, which takes me to the deployment provider, which going back to our CodeDeploy video, the previous one there, I can choose that from here. So I can say CloudFormation, so you could actually deploy your application via CloudFormation, which is kind of cool, or straight into Elastic Beanstalk, which is really handy as well. I'm going to go with CodeDeploy here. I'm going to choose my application. There it is there, Flaskerino. I'm going to choose the staging deployment group for now. We don't have a production one yet. We're going to add that in our next clip. And we're going to hit next step. And we just have to choose a service role that's associated with that. Again, if you don't have it, you could just hit create role here. So that's very, very easy. This role is just going to allow CodePipeline to call those respective APIs in order to get what we want done here. So things like CodeBuild, CodeDeploy, stuff like that. So next step. So from here, I can just hit create pipeline, and it's going to go ahead and create this pipeline for us. And there it is. The pipeline has been created. Now, what this is actually going to do as well, I think this is actually going to kick off a build for us straight away. So we don't actually have to do anything, and it's going to run through our pipeline, right? It wants to go through the pipeline to make sure it'll work. So not doing anything here, we're just going to see how this goes. So you can already see the little blue icon has started here, and you get a little blue shading on the side here. So it's actually going to go out to GitHub now and grab the master branch of that repository. And so this should only be pretty quickly here because all it's going to do is go and grab that. Now you can see here on this configuration section here, it actually says the output artifact from the source. So it's actually given it a name already called my app, so we can go ahead and change that as well later. It says the branch, and it's got an OAuth token, of course, for it to connect to GitHub. It actually needs that OAuth token, so it's put that in by itself. And you can see the owner here, and you can see the poll for source on changes. So it's going to like look at the upstream for changes and grab those if required. And the repository there, Flask Arena. So we can see that the source is all set up. You can see it's on the last commit, so the time that I updated the index HTML. So now it's actually finished that, and it's onto the build phase, but I'm going to rename this to test later because we're not really doing sort of a fancy build. We're more doing a test here. So you can actually see here, it's got an input artifact. So the artifact that came out of the source was called myapp. So that's the input to this step here. And the output is myapp build. So that's what it's going to pass on to the next step, or the deployment step. So it's really nice. Like you get the first step there, which contains your artifact, and then you get this build or test phase, which we're going to rename it to shortly, and that's going to produce the artifact that comes out of that and then into the next step. So you get a really good visual representation here of what's actually happening at each step. Now, of course, I can just open this as well here. If I just click details, open this up in a new tab, we can see some details about what's happening during our build. So we can already see it's completed. It's gone through all of the steps. So these are different steps in that build process. And you can run different bits at each one of these steps. So these are steps within our CodeBuild declarative YAML file that we created. And we can put in different steps here at each point. So we can see here that our tests have actually ran. So inside that container, it ran the tester 404 page, the image count, the image width, the main page, the main page index. These all came back okay. So that's really good. That's from our test index. So we know that it actually executed that correctly. And of course, up here, you can see our linting that's occurred. And this only shows the last 10,000 lines, but I don't think ours is longer than that. So here you can see our linting and any sort of issue that might have come up with our linting. So we actually have some trailing white spaces and a few other things here that should actually be fixed up. Now, our linting case, in this case, is not actually going to error. It's actually just going to show this. But we can add in here, like, so hey, if there was any sort of output from Pylint, maybe you failed the build here and don't actually pass. What I really care about here is that our unit tests have actually completed successfully, but we haven't actually changed anything yet. So we knew our unit tests were going to be okay here. But these are our 5 tests, so this is what we really want to make sure that they're okay. So down here you can see the phases that it's actually going through and what it's actually doing during those phases. So you can actually see that it did a expansion on everything and grabbed all the files and zipped them up and pass them on to the next phase. Because we actually said in our build file, in our repo, we wanted to grab everything after the build test phase and pass it on to the next step. So it's done that for us here as well, and you can get that nice output here. So this is looking pretty good. You can view the entire log as well, but you don't really need to. And you get a good, nice breakdown of each of these steps, right? So, and how long they took, and you can really dig into each step to find out more information, which is quite cool. So back over to CodePipeline here, we can see our deploy phase is actually happening now. So with CodeDeploy, so we can open that up in a new tab as well and get a bit of an idea of what's happening. So here you can see the Flask Arena staging. I can just click on this status here, which will take me straight through, and we should be able to see what's going on. So this is the deployment screen here for our blue-green deployment. So we get a detailed breakdown on the steps that are actually involved in this process. So what I like about this screen here is that you get this really nice instances receiving traffic little bit here on the right-hand side, and it shows you the 2 of 2 original instances that we're running, and then we're going to see our replacement instances come in as well. So we're going to see sort of a live real-time representation of what a blue-green deployment actually looks like, which is really awesome. You don't usually get to see this sort of thing happening in a visualization aspect. So here in step 1, we're going to see the provisioning of the replacement instances. So that's happening right now. We have 2 new instances coming up, and those are going to be brought in here, and they will be considered the replacement environment. And you'll see them appear down the bottom here shortly, which is really cool. So our original instances are still there running, and everything's good for now. Nothing's happened with those. So those are still there, and they're all good. And we should see our step 2 update here in a moment. It probably takes about 3 or 4 minutes for our instances to come online and get the CodeDeploy agent and run the user data, get everything they need rolling. So you can see those have come online now, and you can see down the bottom it's going to run through the actual processes of installing the application on those new instances in order to actually bring them up to the state that we want. We want them on parity, right? These 2 different groups on parity. So now we can see it actually going through the validation service part. So it's installed the service and now it's validating. And now they're in the status of ready. So we can click here as well to view the events at any time to see what's happening. But we can actually get a nice view of all this in CodeDeploy here as well. So we don't really need to see that at the moment. So we can see that the install application on replacement instances has completed, and now we're on to rerouting the traffic to those replacement instances. So it's actually going to handle this whole rerouting aspect for us from the old autoscaling group to the instances in this new autoscaling group. So you can see this here now. We have 2 of the 2 original instances, and we have 2 of the 2 replacement instances as well. So at the moment, we have all four or all two of those auto-scaling groups getting traffic. And you can see that down the bottom here as well. It says traffic, yes, 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 yes. So we all know that they're all getting traffic at the moment. So what's going to happen here in a moment is you can see this next stage here is terminating old instances. So that's going to kill those old ones off. And you can see now down the bottom here that the traffic is only being routed to those replacement instances and not the original instances anymore. So we can see that it's succeeded on everything, and we've gone through the aspect of allowing the traffic to the new auto-scaling group and blocking the traffic from the old auto-scaling group. So it's really like handled very seamlessly in that aspect. So everything looks really, really good, right? We went through this really nice process here of this whole aspect, but we still have these old instances on. Now, the reason why you might want to leave those old instances on is because things might have broken and things just might not have come up correctly. You just never know. You can never rely on anything that's involved in, you know, the network or any sort of layer being 100%. So you really want to make sure that those instances are still there, that auto-scaling group is still there, and those instances are still running for a short amount of time, because you never know if you're going to really need them. So what we can do now is we can actually jump over to our load balancer endpoint and check that our application is running as intended. So as you can see, our application is running as intended. Everything looks good. You know, our pitches still load nicely. Everything's looking good from that aspect. So we know that our application has been able to be deployed correctly. And we still have those old instances there now, but they're not receiving any traffic. So everything's looking good from our application point of view. Our application is up. Our endpoint is working as intended. We of course have all the new instances, or the two new instances in place that are running our application. We have the old original environment still around, but the idea here is that this is going to be automatically terminated in 5 minutes. So by default here, what we said when we actually created this deployment group is we said, hey, after 5 minutes, we want you to terminate any of the old instances that were running still, because we don't want to keep instances around that are not being used. And at the moment, we're pretty happy and we're sure that our application is running. So because we're sure, we're going to hit terminate here. But of course, if we just left this for 5 minutes, it would automatically terminate those old instances for us anyway. And it's going to delete that old auto-scaling group. We don't need that anymore, and we can just use a new one. So we don't care about that. So that's going to go away now, and it's just going to terminate these for us here. So that's pretty cool. And if we jump back over to CodePipeline, we can see now that it's actually still in progress because it's waiting for that 5 minutes to come up before it terminates those instances. But that should be finished here in a moment, because we just said, go ahead and terminate that. So you can see now we have 2 of 2 instances have been terminated, and we get a deployment successful. So if we jump back over to CodePipeline and we just wait a second here, this should update. So there we have it. Our code pipeline is completely green. We've gone from source through to build and staging, our deployment to staging. So that's a pretty much rough sort of breakdown of what CodePipeline is really all about, right? It's about a visualization of chaining things together. Now, there's a lot more you can do in here as well. And we're going to add in our promotion to production in here as well. But one thing I quickly want to do is just show you guys the editing phase here. So you can actually edit the pipeline and add in stages as you would like. You don't have to keep them in this same phase, right? I'm going to go ahead and delete this build phase here and actually add in, and I'm going to call it test. And the action, so if you see over here on the right-hand side, you have a category action. And you can actually choose, you can have approval, source, build, test, deploy, or invoke. So you can invoke a Lambda function, shoot something to SNS, or do whatever you want in any of these phases. Just a really nice way of chaining things together. So I'm actually going to use test here. I'm going to just call this test. I'm going to say the test provider is CodeBuild, right? So I have all these other test providers that I can use, like BlazeMeter, or there's a whole bunch of them here as well. So I'm going to use CodeBuild, and I'm going to say that the project name is Flask Arena, of course. And the artifact's just going to be my app, and the artifact out can be my app test. So we'll add that action in now. And there you have it. I'm going to go ahead and also edit the deployment here because I want to say the import artifact, or the one we bring in, is called test rather than build. So therefore they chain together really nicely. So I can hit save here now and save and continue. So that's been updated now as well. So we have a test phase in there rather than a build phase. But even though our build sort of stuff was running a similar aspect, it's just running our declarative document anyway. So it doesn't really matter, but I want to have the test in there because we're going to be doing pull requests where I want the test to run. So we'll go through that in the next clip where we talk more about production and promotion and how we're going to sort of finish this off. Hopefully that's a good sort of idea about CodePipeline and how it works. And if you have any questions about that or the blue-green deployment aspect, we'll cover that a little bit more in the next clip also. But please drop them below and I can sort of get back to you about whatever. But that's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in for this one. I'll catch you in the next one, and we'll talk about production and promotion and how we're going to handle this and round this off. All right, peace.